We're back. Revelation chapter 2, starting with verse 12, we are now moving on to the next church in the several letters from John to the church. We've already covered Ephesus, we've covered Smyrna, and now we are up to the third city, Pergamos. And John says in verse 12, "And to the angel of the church of Pergamos write, These things saith he which hath the sharp sword with two edges. I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. And thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth." And we're going to stop reading at that point, because we have to find out a little bit more about this church in the area that was around it. Pergamos was, of all of these cities, now Pergamos is, or was, located in what is called Pergamum, was now in where modern day Turkey is. It's all in ruins now. But it was one of the most influential churches, or cities, I should say, in the whole Roman Empire. It was a political center. It was from this place that most of the rulings for Asia Minor, they were affected by the rulings there. This city, actually, it has a unique status because it was the political center. It was very influential. It was in this city that they developed parchment made out of calf skin. It was the world's first psychiatric hospital was founded in Pergamum. It was a well-known city of the arts. It had a center that seated 10,000 people a night. It is said that you could hear a whisper on the stage. The acoustics were supposed to be so good that if somebody on stage, one of the actors, would just whisper, you would be able to hear it far out into the audience. So it was a well-designed city. The Acropolis at Pergamum was a rival to Athens. Its library was the second largest in the ancient world. The collection of the library was so great that Mark Antony gave it to Cleopatra as a wedding gift. So, it had quite a bit of history and quite a bit of things going for it. It was a thriving city, yet Jesus said it was the dwelling place of Satan. If you'll remember, he said, I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. Now, seat can also be translated as to the throne. The word throne gives it a place of personal reference. The king sits in the throne. It also designates or denotes the fact that the person that sat in that seat or that throne was the master of the house. And the very fact that Jesus would call this one city the throne of Satan lets us know that Pergamum was Satan's territory. He was the master of the house, and that was my dog, who's the master of this house. Stay with me. Sorry about that, had to shut the door. This city had a healing center, and this is interesting because this is something that we still use today. It had a healing center that was, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Asclepion. It was built in the honor of Asclepios, and that is the Greek serpent god. So when the patients would go to the hospital at Pergamum, this would creep some people out, it would creep me out, but they believed that when you went into their hospital, that you would go through a tunnel, you would take a sedative, and you would go into the tunnel into this healing center or this hospital, and you would lay on the floor all night, and they had non-poisonous snakes. Yeah, right. Non-poisonous snakes that would just slither around through that room all night, and if the snake were to crawl over you while you're lying on the floor, that snake, the touch of that snake would mean that you have been, that the gods, plural, have chosen you for healing. And so they believed that the snakes carried the healing power of Asclepios, and it was a divine sign that healing was going to come to you. That's why today, even all these thousands of years later, you see that the medical profession uses the snake that twirls around the staff. And if you've ever wondered what that was from, that comes all the way back from this particular church at Pergamum, where they worship the snake god. And so that's why the medical profession, they look back. I mean, that's just something that they've adopted. It comes all the way to our time. We still have the snake as a sign of healing in the medical profession. So maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't. I just think that it's a pretty interesting part of this. The people of Pergamum worshipped several Greek and Roman gods. And then when Christianity came to Pergamum, the belief in one God really made their priests go on the attack. And their most famous victim was this preacher called Antipas. Now, Jesus talks about Antipas here in verse 13. We'll read this. He said, I know thy works and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. So we've already discussed why Pergamum was the seat of Satan in that area. But Jesus said that the believers there, they held fast to the name of Christ, but also they merged with the world. They compromised with the world here at Pergamum. We'll get to that in a little while. But Jesus says, even in those days where Antipas was my faithful martyr. Now, Antipas was he was the bishop of that church or the pastor of that church. Also in this church or in this region is where the Coptic Christians, which was started in Alexandria, Egypt, and it came over to Pergamum, and they believe that they traced their ancestry back to the disciple, Mark. And Mark came there and was their first pastor, and they've got writings that they say substantiates that. But anyway, Antipas was the pastor there, and he, because of his preaching and the preaching of Christ, it caused a lot of problems with the priests, the satanic priests at Pergamum. And so they, it was taught that he cast out so many demons that the demons themselves approached the priests. Now you may say, this sounds like a lot of hokum, but the devil is the god of the world. Our God is the God of all, but the devil is the God of the world. So we may not understand these priests getting these messages from these demons that have been cast out, but in biblical times, Jesus cast out demons too, so there's no reason to think that Antipas couldn't do the same thing, because the disciples did the same thing. But anyway, he cast out so many demons that the demons somehow made their message known to the priests. The priests went to Rome. They complained to the ruler at Rome. The governor ordered Antipas to. Well, here's what the governor in that region did. He ordered Antipas, who was the Christian pastor at Pergamum, which the church that this letter is written to, he ordered him to offer a sacrifice of wine and incense to a statue of the Roman emperor, and then he had to declare that the emperor was Lord and God. Well, Antipas couldn't do that. He wouldn't do that. The day is coming when, those left on earth will have to make similar vows. The church will be gone then, but during the time of the tribulation, we'll see some of these laws come back where you've got to vow your allegiance to the Antichrist. But anyway, Antipas refused, and if you rejected the divinity of the emperor at that time, it was the equivalent of rejecting the city of Rome, and believers were killed because of this. So Antipas has rejected the emperor. He's refused to bow down and say that the emperor is Lord and God. So he was sentenced to death on the altar of Zeus. Now, most of that altar still survives today. The altar of Zeus. In the 30s, now before I get too far ahead, here's what they would do, and this is more than likely what happened to Antipas, since we know that Jesus said he was the martyr there. They would take the victim, and I have to read this, so I'm going to look away for a minute. They would take the victim, in this case Antipas, and they have this bronze bull, this huge bronze bull on this altar to Zeus. Like I said, this still survives today. It's no longer at Antipas, and I'll tell you where it is in a minute. And you're going to see. Anyway, I don't want to give it away. But anyway, they would take the victim and they would place him inside the bull, a big hollowed out bronze bull. And they would tie him in such a way to where his head would go into the head of the bull. Okay, so it's hollow, and Antipas's head, or whoever they were sacrificing, his head would go inside the bull's head, and then they would light a huge fire under the bull, and as the fire would heat the bronze, the person inside the bull would slowly roast to death. And as the victim would begin to moan and begin to cry because of the pain, and you can well imagine, because it's a slow process, he's being baked alive, his cries would echo through these pipes in the bull's head, and it would sound like the bull was coming alive. And that was a big treat for those that were watching this. But Antipas, even in the midst of this torture, in the midst of the flames, Antipas, he died praying for the church. And the year was about 92 AD. So now, if you were to go to Pergamum, you would still see the foundation where this altar was. But in the 19th century, the About 1930, the German engineers, you can see how it's going to tie in here a little bit. The German engineers dismantled the altar. They took it to Berlin. The so-called throne of Satan went on display in the city's Pergamum Museum. Again, this is in the 30s, just in time to inspire one of the most brutal dictators that the world has ever seen, and that dictator was Adolf Hitler. Makes you think, doesn't it? Tell you what, we're gonna knock off there for this lesson. It's going to take us a little bit of time to get through this, but we'll come back and we'll move on with this study. Until then, I'll see you.